Thank you for joining us today on Spotlight on Spirit, a publication of the Department of Minnesota American Legion. And today I have the good fortune of talking with Reverend Carleton Birch, who is a past chaplain in the military. He is Converge's endorser, and he's also a reverend within a faith group called Converge. And so thank you, Carleton, for taking time out for today. First off, do you belong to the American Legion?
I do. I belong to American Legion Post 25 here in Middletown, Delaware.
In Delaware. Well, thank you. And so you have been a part of Converge for a while. Could you tell us a little bit about who Converge is, where they come from, what
Sure.
they stand for?
First of all, when I came to be part of the movement, we were known as Baptist General Conference. And we've gone through a number of name changes over the years. We're a historically Baptist group. We call ourselves a fellowship of churches or a movement of churches who help people find, know, and follow Jesus. And we do that in three main ways: by starting new churches, by strengthening existing churches. In other words, we just don't want to have numbers in our churches, but we want to have healthy, thriving congregations who are people supporting one another in their beliefs. And then we finally do that by going to the unreached people groups of the world. So proclaiming that message.
Okay. And so historically, it sounds like the Bible is a sacred text of yours, right?
Yeah, it truly is. And we're so, like a lot of evangelical type denominations who kind of go back to sola scriptura and, the Bible is our guide, instead of a hierarchical church structure. We came about really as an interesting story. A group of women from a Baptist church in New York City got together and petitioned to do an outreach to sailors who came to port in New York City. That resulted in a church being established solely for the sailors who had come in and out of port in New York City. That church commissioned a ship who was captained by a Swede to go do evangelism back in Sweden. Now, this was way back in 1844. So we're thinking pre-Civil War in America time frame. And that captain, he was even banned from residing in Sweden, because at that time, if you were of the Baptist faith, you were persecuted and really forced to leave the country. Nevertheless, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious, why would they be persecuted?
I mean, during history, a lot of different religious groups have been persecuted. Anytime a religious group forms that's kind of different from the status quo, some people feel threatened. And, of course, in Sweden, to this day, the state church is Lutheran. So they may have a lot more openness to worship as you choose, but it's still the state church. So back then there was a lot of persecution, and however, that Swedish captain was very successful in doing evangelism. And as people came to follow Jesus, they had to leave Sweden. Many of them found their way to America. And eventually a church was founded in Illinois, the first Swedish Baptist church.
Okay.
And only 25 years later, after that,
Uh-huh.
there were 65 churches,
Oh my.
and those churches got together and became the Swedish Baptist General Conference.
Okay.
So that was in 1879. And then shortly after that, they decided that that wasn't enough. They wanted to have a way to educate people in the Bible and then in the fine arts. So they established Bethel University that survives to this day in the Twin Cities.
Oh, okay.
Back then, it was known as Bethel College.
Uh-huh.
So that was 1879. So we've been a denomination for a long time. During that time, let's jump ahead to World War II.
Uh-huh.
And many of the pastors ended up leaving their congregations to become chaplains in the military.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the 30s or something. So there weren't that many churches, right? So there's a big conversation back and forth about why are these pastors leaving their congregations to go serve in the military in a foreign war on the other side of the Atlantic. And many of these pastors' response was, well, that's where my congregation is. They're being drafted and sent over there, and I want to be where they are. So 3 of those pastors ended up being killed in the line of duty during World War II.
Mm.
And then right after the war, that led to a lot of multiculturalism because both Swedes congregants and the pastors were getting introduced to all these other cultures in Europe
Right.
and across America when they were being sent everywhere for the military.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1945, when the war ended, they decided, well, we don't want to be known just as Swedish anymore, so we're just going to be Baptist General Conference.
Okay.
Then one of those chaplains who served during World War II in 1959, he became the president of our movement. And one of the first things he did was make us our own endorsing agency. And I'll talk a little bit about what that exactly is.
Right.
And then the last thing he did in 1969, during kind of the height of a lot of civil unrest in our nation, was doing outreach to the inner cities to African American congregations. Mm. And so by the early 2000s, we decided to drop Baptist from our name because we're more than Baptist. And to this day, we have about 1,600 churches spread in 10 different regions across the country. And about over 40% of those churches are non-white. So we're truly multicultural movement of churches today.
One of the things, hopefully you can address it, the word Baptist means something to Baptists. So if you're not a Baptist, is there any reason why they put that into their title?
Yeah, as people studied the Bible, and there's a big group that realized that the early church did not baptize infants, they baptized believers. So they became convinced that the order of things is that you became a follower of Jesus, and then as a visual representation of that decision, you became baptized. And then the early church, you were baptized under running water, dunked, as they say. And then if there was no running water, then there were allowances made for other types of baptism. And so it was kind of bringing the Protestantism back to its early Christian roots, I guess you could say.
Okay. Okay. So there's something about your choice of what you choose to believe that is integral in this faith development. Is that accurate?
Yes, exactly right.
Okay.
So we're known as Converge,
Uh-huh.
and the reason I'm told that we picked that name is that we converge around the cross of
Oh.
Jesus, and that we just focus on that and not a lot of minors of the faith. Like a lot of different faiths, church groups split off from one another over this issue or that issue.
Mm-hmm.
But over the last 150 years, we have not done so, mainly because we've just focused on that central role of what we would call the gospel
Okay.
belief is central in our lives. And then we give leeway or religious freedom for some of these other areas of the faith which people might disagree on.
Okay. So Converge falls under as a religion. It's a Christian religion. I heard you also say evangelical is so
Right. So we're a Christian, so we're a denomination.
okay.
So a denomination under the Christian religion,
Okay.
and um, and that denomination is a formal recognition that really comes in a lot of ways. It comes about by recognition by the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, of a
Oh,
nonprofit religious group that you
okay.
petition to to form in that way.
Uh-huh.
So that's what a denomination is.
So it's more the IRS that is defining how. Okay.
Yeah, because you can't send chaplains into the military without being recognized as a denomination by the IRS as a religious group.
Okay. All right. Well, that's helpful to know. But there's been a transformation within the faith group, it sounds like, to recognize who are the people that belong to it. And it's more than Swedes, but it originally might have formed from European descent, it sounds
Yeah, I
like.
mean, basically
Okay.
a bunch of persecuted Swedes that came over to America and
Okay.
started churches in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota,
Okay.
and then have spread out since then.
It's interesting, just on a side note, how many different groups are part of and call America their home because of persecution on some level or another. And
That's absolutely right. And
yeah.
it's also amazing how many of these groups started speaking other languages. I mean, a lot
Oh,
of the reasons why in America you have so many different religious groups is because they all spoke their native tongue when they first got here. So
oh,
even right
yeah.
up to the 1950s, a lot of the Swedish Baptist churches were speaking Swedish in their religious services.
So
So
you're a little bit of touch of home brought to your new home.
yeah,
So culturally and socially speaking, it had a very important role. And then Converge is evangelical. Sacred text is the Bible. Jesus Christ is part of God. And do you want to unpack a little bit? So if I'm somebody that doesn't have any clue whatsoever of all these, because there's over 200 different faith groups, I think, in America. What is Christian? What is evangelical? You know, what does that mean?
yeah, I mean, the word Christian just means a follower of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
So someone who's a follower of Jesus Christ. And then um, at the beginning the of Christianity, there were just house churches spread
Mm,
across um, lower Europe, and they became more formal churches over time. And there came a time when the East split from the West, and the Eastern churches became Orthodox, and the Western churches became Roman Catholic.
You're kind of a couple hundred years ago, more than 100 years ago, 500 years ago, like
Oh yeah,
far back
that
in
goes
history,
back.
thousands.
That goes way back over 1,000 years ago.
Okay.
And basically, where the capital should be. So the capital of Christendom, should it be in Constantinople,
Constantinople.
or should it be in Rome? So that's really where the original split came. And
Yeah.
then you had the Reformation
Yeah.
with Martin Luther
Martin Luther.
in Germany, and that's where Protestantism came from.
Okay.
And then from Protestantism, because of all these different languages and beliefs and everything out of Protestantism, you really have all those branches mostly out of Protestantism in
Sure.
America today.
Yeah.
So most all churches are, most of the churches in America are offshoots of that Protestantism, Martin Luther.
And maybe some of the reasons why you're one faith or another just has to do with some nuances, maybe, or family, or how you interpret some of the texts that we have.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay.
And as you study the Bible, when you first read the Bible, it just opens up this new world.
Yeah.
That you've never really seen before. I mean, it's one of it's the most amazing book that's ever been written. And it's really 66 books written over 1,000 years. So, and it's all fits together like a glove.
Okay.
And all the different books support one another, and you see God's story being interwoven throughout all these books of the Bible, and you see who God is, and you see who you see a lot about yourself in the Bible, and you come to realize that God wants a relationship with us through the Bible.
Okay.
And then when you get beyond that, there's disagreements.
Oh my goodness. You're also what they call an ecclesiastical endorser. That's a big title.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so really it goes back to the First Amendment to our Constitution, believe it or not.
Okay.
So Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Well, since George Washington, before we were a country, George Washington in the First Continental Army, his first general order was the establishment of chaplains for the militia of the colony. So once we had a constitution, the military still wanted to have chaplains as part of their military, but they ran into a problem with this whole establishment clause. So how do you determine who is religiously fit to serve inside of the federal government, really, in the military?
Oh, okay.
And who is not? So they came up with this system where they would recognize a religious body. That religious body, like I said before, that has a tax ID number by the IRS as a church, basically. And that religious body identifies a person that certifies those clergy as religiously qualified to represent them inside of the government. And that keeps the federal government out of the religion business.
Beliefs can be tender areas, and they have always been tender areas. I believe the George Washington, the chaplain corps is second to the infantry corps. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, but I mean, obviously, you had to form the army, right?
Right. But then how?
Well, you didn't really have corps. There's a big argument inside the military about who's first and who's second. But
is there? Okay.
Nevertheless, his first general order was establishment of chaplains. So
chaplains help people unpack what they believe and why they believe it, and provide that connection to God. Is that
yeah,
correct?
absolutely. And people
Okay.
come to chaplains for all kinds of reasons. A lot of ways, chaplains are a safety net, and uh, people are always falling through the cracks. And
Mm,
when sometimes they may go to a chaplain just because they're desperate, and they may not be religious at all.
mm,
They're just desperate for whatever reason,
sure.
or they're going through an incredibly difficult time
Yeah.
through circumstances in their lives. And so, chaplains, we see a wide variety of people, um, and that variety is generally very much different from, say, a pastor in a church, who generally sees people who are already going into that church and part of that
Oh,
congregation.
okay. Um,
As a chaplain, you see everyone and anyone from every kind
yeah.
of faith background you can imagine.
We get to talk twice today, and so we separated out these podcasts because you're also going to be talking about chaplains in the military.
Yeah, that's my favorite topic. So
Yes.
I think we have to get back to their first topic here.
Well, no, it's just so the listeners, you're going to have a podcast on chaplains in the military because Carleton has extensive years worth of experience in the military as a chaplain. And he's the ecclesiastical endorser for Converge. You help Converge pastors, if you will, or chaplains, become chaplains in the military, become chaplains in hospices, hospitals, prisons. And so you represent that bridge, saying they've met the criteria.
Yeah, for what we call professional paid chaplains, and then there's a whole category of chaplains who are like volunteers in
Yep.
police departments and fire departments, and uh, it's a bigger chaplaincy is bigger than what I represent. I just represent
Yes.
those professional paid folks.
Yes. And so there's a big difference, and we'll probably talk about that a lot in the chaplains in the military piece. There's a difference between chaplains and pastors. The pastors in Converge are responsible for Converge people.
That's right. I mean, it's all about the church, and we look at the church as like some people look at it like a hospital, that there's no perfect people. We are all
Mm,
imperfect people, but
uh-huh.
we also believe that we're created for connection,
Okay.
and so church gives an opportunity for people to get that connection that we were created for. It's a
Okay.
fellowship of people getting together, and there's small house churches and then there's mega churches.
Sure. Some of it's personal preference, maybe, if you want to belong to a small church or a large church.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Or,
there's even online churches.
oh,
So
yeah. Yeah.
since COVID, those have become very popular.
So Converge has historical roots that have evolved over time, and Jesus Christ, or the triune God, is part of their belief system. So someone that would be interested in figuring out if that is something that they want to believe can go online, or can find a Converge church in their neighborhood, or maybe there's one online, a church that they can go to.
Yeah, I mean, because of our name Converge, I have people coming to me all the time wanting to find out more.
Okay.
And if you just Google Converge Church, there's a link on there to find a church. Just put your zip code in, find out if there's a church in your area.
And Converge kind of helps people unpack. I think all faith groups probably do that. Help people unpack what they believe, how they believe it, why they believe it. Helps to people mature spiritually, I think, is part of. Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And we really want people since we believe that the Bible is God's communication to us, something that He wants us to know through the Bible about Himself and who we are. There's a lot of teaching about the Bible in our churches that helps us to know a little bit more about God, who He is, His purpose for mankind on earth, and for our lives today. We believe that each person is unique, that God created us and cares for each individual greatly. Each person is valued and has great worth in the sight of God. And because of that, we should also value people greatly. And we do that through the worship time, which often is singing.
Okay.
If you're like me, I'm not a great singer. Sometimes I'll just stand there and I'm and just enjoy everybody else singing around me. But still, it's a great time. And then you learn a little bit about the Bible through the teaching of the pastor as well.
Can I delve into a little bit of a topic that I don't think we as people talk about or experience in a well-developed way anymore? So there's this suffering, mental or physical suffering. Historically, I think despair might be an appropriate word that religions might be used to. But suffering as a human experience, do you know how Converge meets an individual that is suffering for whatever reason whatsoever? You know, is it something that the theology of Converge has talked about?
Yeah, I would say that we don't have a unique view of suffering, but a similar view of suffering from most Christian churches. And that view is that God created humankind perfect, but sin came into the world, and with it brought suffering and and messed us up.
Okay.
Not only messed up people, but messed up the world, the environment we live in, and everything else. And then our theology, or our view of how God works in the world, is that He sent Jesus to help fix that.
Okay.
And he fixed it by first fixing the relationship, that broken relationship that we have with God. And then over time, He's going to fix all the suffering. And that's why Christians look forward to the kind of a new world in the future where all suffering will be gone. But in the meantime, suffering's a part of the human experience. And sometimes when people are suffering, they lose that identity that they are all priceless in the sight of God, and they're all worth a lot in the sight of God. They may feel worthless and hopeless. And so our theology will say we as individuals need to be hope in life, not only for ourselves, but for others as well.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. It sounds like you have a wealth of knowledge. It might be interesting if we had a lot more time, maybe 3 hours to talk about the theology of Converge and how it's transformed over time. As we get ready to disconnect, are there any parting words or any pieces of information you think would be helpful?
No, I mean, we consider ourselves just one of many different denominations. We work with other denominations for the common good. Many of our churches reach out to their communities and try to bring hope and life into their communities through different type of outreach events. And so you'll often see a Converge church working with other churches who might not be a lot alike them, but they're working for the common good of the community. And so our churches do believe in reaching out to bring hope to those who may have lost that.
Thank you for bringing that up, because churches historically are community assets. They contribute in a multifaceted, a myriad of ways, if you will. They must probably report that to the IRS, but they don't necessarily let that be known to communities. They're just busy about doing the work. And the parallel, I'm just thinking about the American Legion. We're just busy doing the work.
Yeah, exactly.
And letting people know what we do and how we influence the community for good can sometimes be something that we don't necessarily think about.
Well, and then the final thing I'd say in that, and just bringing it back to the Legion, I mean, there's still so many veterans, and a lot of veterans are living with pain. They're living with trauma that they went through, many earlier in their life, but they still suffer the results of that trauma, even decades later. And so I do appreciate the American Legion and other veteran service organizations that seek to reach out and give those veterans a home. And that's why I retired in 2018. And one of the first things I did was look for the VSO in my community that I moved to here in Delaware to be part of that.
Reconnecting with fellow veterans.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate that. And as I alluded to, we're talking to Reverend Birch again, more specifically about chaplains in the military. So look us up, like, and subscribe. Thanks.